Hello there. This episode is on the Pakleds and it's a bit of a thought experiment. We're going to start with the Mondor Type, and bear with me, we're going to be exploring a couple of things about the Pakleds here. The Mondor Type vessel was a ship first encountered by Starfleet, specifically the USS Enterprise NCC 1701D in 2365. This vessel was far away from the Pakleds' home system. Now, it was determined that the Pakleds had been previously encountered by the Federation before this event, but this was the first encounter of the Pakleds by the Enterprise, and certainly of the Mondor Type vessel. One of the things that becomes immediately apparent about this ship is not only is it described as a very basic type of vessel, it's a hodgepodge of a ship. It's basic wedge shape with a sort of crunched nose and what looks like a fuel container on the side, it's probably just a cargo pod. It's impulse only, and when Geordi goes aboard it, we note that the technology aboard the ship is of differing alien origins. We've got Romulan shields, technology of Klingon, Bajoran origins. So it's kind of got bits from everybody on board this ship, but there is a lot of potential in the vessel to actually be a threat to the Enterprise if its weapons are sufficiently enhanced enough. It's not a dangerous ship, but the Pakleds themselves do belie a sinister nature, an undercurrent to their people that's not immediately apparent. The Mondor is not a threatening vessel, but as I said, it's a bit of a mixture of differing technologies. One of the things that stands out to me is the fact that, for a start, the vessel has anything Klingon on it. You'd think if the Klingons had an officer captured, the Klingons would immediately dismiss that officer as expendable because they've been allowed themselves to be captured by an inferior enemy. They'd just destroy the ship, and even if they were willing to get that person back, they'd still most likely destroy the ship. However, sticking with the Mondor type ship for a moment, as I said, there's a sublight vessel, obviously come together from different mismatched components from other vessels. They don't work terribly well together, and the Pakleds lack the skill to fully integrate these systems into a cohesive vessel. They require some outside assistance. We know these vessels would ultimately go on to become the so-called Pakled clump ships. Now, here are my theories on this, my thought process on this. This isn't specifically a breakdown of the Mondor type vessel specifically. It's about the underlying thing about the vessel and the Pakleds. How, is my first question, did that ship get so far out in the first place? Here's my theory. The Pakleds, we know, are smarter than they seem. There has to be some kind of class of Pakled who actually, at least to some degree, know what they're doing with their technology, or they are broadly employing aliens to do the work for them, which I highly doubt. So they would have to have some level of technical understanding just to operate the technology. Because if you were to dump me into a spaceship from the 24th century, or even from the 22nd century, I'd have no idea how to navigate deep space. I'd have no idea how to operate many of its systems. Now, in fairness, the Pakleds can't do that either, at least not all of it, but they have been able to navigate their way out there, and they're smart enough at least to operate the systems, if not replicate the technology and repair it. But there has to be an underlying reason. The Pakleds are described as impatient for their technological development, so they're kind of getting it from others. They must be taking that home, and someone with at least a little bit of a brain must be taking it apart and going, right, I might not be able to replicate this, but I can do something with it. They can make a version of it, or they can enhance it. The Pakleds are able to expand these vessels to become the clump ships. Now, we know that they had help doing that, but they have to have built these ships in the first place. So where did they get the Mondor type vessel from originally? We know they're a basic ship. They're an older design sort of ship. But did they steal them? Did they trick someone into giving them? Did they buy them? How did they get out into deep space in the first place to get them? Did somebody come to them? There are many questions about the Mondor type that don't add up unless you start to think, you know what, the Pakleds, there's got to be a bit more intelligence there than we give them credit for. This isn't like the Kazon in the Delta Quadrant. The Kazon were used by the trade to build the ships and operate them, so that's how the Kazon understood their technology. This race is different. We don't know much about the inner workings of Pakled society. We know that they have a very complicated government structure that's constantly changing and an extremely vicious society. They're also known for not using the technology correctly. What I mean by that is they'll use a cutting tool, something that would be designed to saw something open, they'll use it as an axe. They'll use a phaser as a club. They don't necessarily understand some of the technology. That's the Pakleds on the whole. Someone somewhere has to know what they're doing. The only explanation as to how any of this works is if there's some Pakleds that do. For example, going back to the Mondor Type, it's sublight only, it's got no warp drive. How did it get out there? Now, if we start to think of that ship as being more of a lure, if we think of it as being the worm on the hook, that there were actually other Pakled vessels that were warp capable. Some of them dragged it out there in the first place to gather this technology. It's more inoffensive, more harmless looking to have this little harmless impulse ship bobbing around out there than it is to have a warp capable, heavily armed vessel that might actually be perceived as a threat. It adds to the image of the Pakleds as being harmless and innocuous and lowering you into a false sense of security. Yes, they might not fully understand all the technology they get and might not be able to replicate it or duplicate it across their fleet, but they'd get bits and pieces, they get ideas, and if they get enough of the same thing, they could just simply use it again and again and again on other ships. So they'd steal more than one replicator, for example, and just install it on multiple vessels. But if you think about it in those terms, the Samaritan snare makes a lot more sense, because we know that the Pakleds were deliberately trying to lure people to them, and we know they're quite smart in that sense. They're quite sneaky, they're underhanded, and they're manipulative. Their innocence belies a sinister nature. And if you take that train of thought to the next level, it does make some degree of sense that their ships would have to have more capabilities, that they'd have to have someone who knows how to put them together, assemble them, fix them, and bring them out there. Now, I grant you, probably they couldn't fix the major systems, the technology they were getting off the Romulans, the Klingons, the Bajorans, the Federation, whoever. But the base technology, where that came from, I'm willing to bet a few strips of latinum that is original Pakled technology. And they hide their intelligence to some degree, or at least some of them do, to allow themselves to assimilate into others and into their surroundings so they can steal or trade more technology to enhance themselves, to make themselves go. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Am I way off? Are the Pakleds just as dumb as they seem? But you think about it, at least for me, it would make some degree of sense for the Pakleds to have at least a moderate amount of intelligence, the ability to at least plan these things, and have got to space in the first place and then decided everyone else has all these cool technologies, we want them as well, but they're not willing to wait for their natural development. Let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next one. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.